And the Joint Task Force in Delta State, headed by Major General Jamal Abdul Salam of the 6th Division Nigerian Army, has recovered 14 lifeless bodies of the soldiers killed in Okwama community in Ughelli South local government area of Delta State. The bodies were recovered in the early hours of Saturday. Some of the recovered corpses were said to have been beheaded, and the bodies of the commanding officer and the two majors killed were seen floating by the riverbank at the NDDC jetty in the coastal Delta community. The entire communities in the Bomadi and Ughelli South local government areas have been reportedly cordoned off by troops of the 6th Division Nigerian Army, Port Harcourt, who also oversees the 63 Brigade in Asaba. Okay, let's speak to security defense and security specialist David Otto on how this incident will be viewed internationally and what the military should be doing to win the support and confidence of citizens. Very warm welcome to Newsnight. It's a very sad period in Nigeria's history, and President Bola Ahmed Tinubu was succinct in his personally signed letter, condoling with the armed forces, officers and women of the armed forces and the rest, and that this act cannot be condoned. How?
Chris, we have to give all the heartfelt, condolence to these soldiers and their families, of course. If these perpetrators came from outside the country, if this was an attack by a neighboring state on the soldiers, this would be a declaration of war. To kill service personnel, whatever the circumstances, is a direct attack on the sovereignty of the state. And why do we still have these kind of situations happen? We had police officers being killed in the same state, in Delta. We had military officers being killed in Niger State. We've had children being taken away from school by bandits. This is a direct attack on the sovereignty of the country. And the president and the commander-in-chief, has made it very clear that the perpetrators should not go unpunished. This should never happen in a state of this nature because, of course, the state has the monopoly of force. What, in effect, we're experiencing now is that the monopoly of force has shifted from the hand of the state to non-state actors. Nigeria is under attack, and the message is clear: nobody is safe.
Yeah, nobody is safe. First, let me ask you, how will the international community view this kind of attack by citizens on its own protectors, the armed forces? Do we have such situations, in times of peace happening?
It's unheard of. To have your military personnel being attacked by members of a local community that belong to the same country in a time of peace, as you mentioned. The international community will be
aghast with what has happened now.
Just like we're all shocked by what is happening. It should never happen in a country of this nature, in any country.
Well, it's like the umpteenth time that it is happening now. You reeled out recent statistics. I think the last one before now was in Niger State. About 27 soldiers, were killed in cold blood.
Yes.
We've had that in OD, I think about the year 2000 or 2001.
Yes.
The police were sent in. The community wiped the entire police force. The president then, Obasanjo, sent in a battalion, no, not a battalion, maybe a platoon or so of soldiers. And the same thing happened, and he just gave a direct order and said, level the place. The same thing happened in Zakibiam, in Benue State. Why sometimes the kind of missions the Nigerian military go for are supposed to be police actions or responses from the police force. I mean,
but I think
are we getting it wrong?
We're getting it wrong, Mr. Chris. You know, there is what you call force deployment strategy. When you deploy your forces, whether be it times of peace or times of war, there are certain strategies that you put in place to protect your forces when you're deploying them. You've got to understand the threat dynamics within those areas, and that's where intelligence comes in. You do not deploy your forces to a community that is experiencing clashes without having intelligence on ground. That's why we have, intelligence services required to work hand in gloves with other agencies, coordination and collaboration. Why would a battalion 181 be ambushed and be wiped out by a community and there is no response, either from the police or either from any other services? Now, what that means is that, one, there was an intelligence failure in terms of how the community is going to react. Number two, there was a failure in terms of the backup operations. Did they call for backup? Did the backup not arrive in time? Of course, it didn't arrive on time, because if it did arrive on time...
They were going for a peace mission, mind you.
Yes, but you know, this of course is not a peace mission, because if it were a peace mission, they would not be ambushed and killed. So which means if they were going for a peace mission, the intelligence was wrong. It wasn't a peace mission. It was an ambush that was set up. So the military got the intelligence wrong if they said they were going for a peace mission. So the question is, who is going to account for this? Is any military authority going to be held accountable for the failures? Because of course, you know, these are the husbands, friends, brothers of Nigerians. You know, their families will be railing on this situation. So there has to be a change of strategy. We have seen that communities have been emboldened. They know that they can do this, they can attack the military and kill. Look at NSAS. Police officers were roasted by the same people that they're supposed to protect. And what message has been sent to the community? So we're living in a society now which, you know, I'm sure that the Commander-in-Chief, Mr. President, would have to review not just how security forces, security personnel are being protected within the country, but within the security architecture itself, their force deployment strategy must change, because obviously they are not getting it right. You cannot have men in uniform, military men, being ambushed by civilians, trained officers, senior officers being ambushed and wiped out by civilians.
In one fell swoop.
Just like that.
And Amnesty International has not raised a voice. We've not heard anything about this dastardly annihilation of, officers and men of the Nigerian army. I'm sure if the military go high-handed on, those criminal elements, Amnesty would raise their voice, will hear their voice.
You see, there in international relations, there is what is called interest. Each organization has their own interest in terms of, how they respond to these kind of, scenarios. Nigeria should not expect Amnesty International to respond positively in this kind of scenario, or perhaps negatively, whatever the case may be. I think the responsibility now is for the government, the commander-in-chief, the military heads, the security chiefs, or whatever the national security advisor, to put a stop to a scenario where the country is now under severe attack by non-state actors. If you can kill this number of soldiers, what stops you from arresting the senior military members or arresting the commander-in-chief? Because non-state actors are being emboldened to carry out these kind of attacks, and it should never happen in a state as such. Now, in terms of the level of condemnation that you'd have from international INGOs or the likes of Amnesty, I don't think that is the focus point that one should really pay attention to. I think the most important thing is to get the military
in the bud.
to nip this in the bud, and it shouldn't happen.
And shouldn't the police really be strengthened? You know, the Nigerian military seems overstretched. They are everywhere, even doing ordinarily what the police should be doing.
And I think, Chris, you know, the reason is very simple. The military is biting more than what it can chew. There has to be inter-agency coordination and collaboration. We've got what we call the threat matrix of each country, which Nigeria doesn't have at this point in time. Understanding the threat matrix of the country, understanding your vulnerability assessments of the areas where you deploy your forces. The military can never be everywhere because of the numerical disadvantage that the military has. So what we're talking about here is how do you then leverage that with bringing in other agencies.
Combine the forces and
coordination and cooperation
and the rest.
But not just that.
Bring in NCDSC, bring in DSS operatives. I think they've brought these people because I know in Borno State, in the northeast, I mean, at the height of Boko Haram, you had these combined operations, DSS officers going to Sambisa Forest with the civil defense guy, with the mobile police special forces and the rest.
You have all that, Chris, and I think you know, one of the gaps that we've had for some time since the constitutional reform, which you know kind of wiped away the powers of traditional rulers, is that information that is supposed to come from these traditional rulers who rule these local communities is no longer coming because the wings of the traditional rulers has been clipped to a point where they are controlled by their local government chairman. Even if you're the...
that's a constitutional matter, David.
That's a constitutional matter, but what is important about the constitutional matter, Chris, is that you have an intelligence gap. And if this attack was reported by the community to the police or to the military, it would not have succeeded. But there was a gap in which the military thought they were going for a peace mission, but they were being ambushed. And this is where I say, coming from the traditional or the local communities would have been the best intelligence that they could get. But there is a gap there which needs to be filled.
Yeah, well, we'll be interrogating this more with retired General John Eneche, former defense spokesman, who will join us after the break. Thanks so very much, David Otto, defense and security specialist on Newsnight.